Without further ado, please extend a warm welcome to Rabbi Rami Shapiro. I'll give you a 5 minutes.
Do we have an hour?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize we had a whole hour. I'm going to spend 45 minutes telling you all the cool things about me that he didn't share. So, okay. So can I move around? Or you can, all right, fine. Okay, so there's just one thing that I want you to learn this morning, and then we're going to unpack it. So we're going to start with it without any explanation, nothing else. You have a handout, and it's a song, it's a chant. And then I'll tell you what we're singing and why we're singing it and how it fits into the topic, which is I was asked to talk about a daily practice that Jews do that might help sort of give you an insight into what Judaism has to say about reality, about life, about human nature. So it's called Elohai Neshama. So it's on the handout, and it goes down. The words are Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Just try the words first. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Let's just try it one more time. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Okay, but it's a song. So I'm going to sing it, and then you'll try to sing it with me, and we'll see how it goes. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Goes up. The he goes up the first time you do it. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai, that's the whole thing, Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. One more time. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Every morning when a Jewish person wakes up, this is what they're supposed to chant. The first thing you say when you wake up is, "Thank God I woke up." That's the first thing. But right after that, you chant, Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. My God, Elohai, Neshama, the breath, the soul, Shenatata Bi, that you have placed in me or that you have breathed into me. Tehora, she is pure. The soul you have breathed into me is pure. We want to talk about what soul means, why it's feminine, she, and what it means to be pure. But this is the first, I guess you say, the first theological statement that the Jew makes when the Jew wakes up in the morning. Now, when I say the Jew, I mean me. And maybe a handful of other Orthodox Jews in Nashville, I don't know. Most Jews I know just get up and go, "Oh, God, I got to get up." But what you're supposed to do is say, Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai nishema shenatata bi tehorahi. And then you get up. Okay. So this prayer goes back, no one knows exactly how far, but it's in the earliest rabbinical texts. So to prove that, I brought the text. And so what I can't, well, I'll talk about it here. I don't like podiums, but I'll talk about it here. What I brought is the first volume of a multi-volume work called the Talmud. I'm going to pass it around because it's too weird not to actually look at it closely. Even though you can't read it, it's worth looking at. So the Talmud, there's the Bible. That's the primary or the earliest text of Jewish stories and legal positions. And then there's the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is an oral teaching that tries to make sense out of the Bible. So when the Bible says stuff, it may have made sense in biblical times, but by the time you get to the early rabbis, 1,000 years later, they go, what? How can you do what the Bible says? So, for example, the Bible will talk about if your son, upsets you, you get to whip them, and the rabbis say, what kind of father is that? So you can't do that. So they say, but the Bible says. So you say, okay, yeah, you have to whip them. And then they say, but you have to use, literally they talk about wet noodles or strings. I mean, they make it so you can't really do anything with it. Or the rabbis don't like capital punishment. So the Bible says, you can have capital punishment. The rabbis make capital punishment nearly impossible to carry out because you need so many witnesses and all these things. They just they can't change the law, but they add laws to the law to make it impossible to carry them out. Or they add laws to the law to expand on what they think the law is trying to accomplish. In any case, that's the Mishnah. And then the Mishnah is sort of done around the year, let's say 200. And then when they're done with the Mishnah, someone says, but wait, there's more. And there's people who say, but now you have to explain the Mishnah to me. And so they have more commentary. And then a few hundred years later, they end up with the Talmud, which is the Mishnah and the commentary to the Mishnah. And that's what this is. And it's thousands and thousands of pages. And people spend lifetimes studying this book. I spent 5 years studying it, which was enough to realize this isn't really my life's work. So I have, just to impress people, I have on my shelves 2 whole sets of Talmud with different commentaries, but the Talmud itself contains commentaries. So I'm going to pass it around, and you're not supposed to highlight a Talmud, but I did anyway. The passages in yellow are the passages we've been chanting, but you get in this, you can see how the page is laid out, and this has been true since the earliest printing press, because one of the first books that was actually printed was a Talmud. So you put the Mishnah in the center, and then you have commentary on the Mishnah down below, and then you have all these other, you can sort of see it, and you'll see it up close when I pass it around, all these other things that are little blocks of text and with white spaces around it. Those are all other commentators commenting on other parts of the text. And it spans centuries. So all throughout the text is what we would call today hypertext. If you go on Wikipedia and then there's little clicks and you can see other people's comments on what the main text is, all that is in the Talmud. There's a book called The Talmud and the Internet. When the internet first came out, someone said, wait a minute, that's what the Talmud is. It's all these different voices, but on a printed page. And it never ends. Eventually they put it in a book, but then there's more commentary, because that's what Jews do. When they get up after chanting Elohai Neshama, they write commentaries on things. So if you're interested, in this version that I brought, you get the original text, and then there's English in the back, and I put a little marker where the English is, so you can get a sense of what the highlighted portions are. Does that make sense, what I'm going to pass around? So I'm going to start over here. No, I think I'll start at the back and end up over here. I'll start with someone whose hands are free. So that's upside down. So, for thousands of years, Jews have been chanting Elohai Neshama. It probably goes back to Jesus. Jesus probably got up in the morning and would chant Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi, which is interesting because the message of the Elohai is very different than the message of the Catholic Church, for example. Because the message of Elohai is that you are, in your true spiritual nature, pure. Now, I'm not a Catholic, and I'm not a Catholic scholar, so if I'm wrong, you can correct me. I wouldn't be surprised that I'm wrong. So if I'm misunderstanding Catholic theology, you should correct me and do it quick so I don't repeat it at some other church. But my understanding is that from many different Christian perspectives, people are born with an existential, original sin. You have this sinful nature. And that the only way to free yourself from that nature is through belief in the salvific quality of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I mean, John makes it very clear, right? Whoever believes in him shall not, die, or shall, have eternal life. So when Jesus would chant Elohai Neshama, however, he couldn't have had original sin in mind because Jews don't have original sin. The concept never occurred to us. And the Elohai Neshama says just the opposite. Elohai Neshama says, my soul, my spiritual nature that comes directly from God, is Tehorah, pure. I'm going to talk about what purity means in a sec. But first, let's talk about the fact that my soul is feminine. So in Judaism, Hebrew is a gendered language. So everything is either masculine or feminine. The body, whether you're a man or a woman, your body is masculine. So the word for body is goof, right? Now, right? You're thinking of someone's body in particular, I know, but so that's the Hebrew word for body is goof. The Hebrew word for soul, there's actually 5 different words, but we won't get into all that, but all 5 of them, neshama being one of them, all 5 of them are feminine words. Your physical being is masculine, not male, obviously, but masculine. Your spiritual essence is feminine. Why that is, I don't know. I'm going to speculate in a second. But every encounter that the ancient rabbis had, and ancient saying it goes back more than 2,000 years, every encounter that the ancient rabbis had with the divine, they articulated in feminine language. So when they talk about, when Jesus says, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, right, I'm there. So that comes from an older statement. Jesus says 2 or 3. The rabbis in the Talmud start with, actually the older text, the Mishnah, start with 10, whenever 10 people are gathered. Then they say, 9. And 8, and they go all the way down. Well, even if it's just one person really devoted to studying the Bible or something, even there. But the word they use is Shekhinah. Shekhinah literally means the presence of God. the divine presence. But it's feminine. Now, the thing to keep in mind, why is this so interesting, is that the people who talk about this, the people who created the whole edifice about having the experience of the divine, were all men. It was, I mean, it still is to a great degree. Judaism is a patriarchal religion. It's run by men. Now, it's not, today things are different. We've had women rabbis. We've had that since the 60s, but not in Orthodoxy. And these guys were way before liberal Judaism, right? So it was a religion created by men, speaking mostly to men. I'm sort of exaggerating, but not too much. And in the hierarchy of things, men were on top. I mean, it's not explicitly, God, Jesus, the man, and then the woman, that kind of hierarchy that exists in Christian texts, but it's the same idea. And yet, when the rabbis have an experience of the divine, they choose a word, Shekhinah, which is feminine. The question would be why? Then it gets more interesting. When they hear the voice of God, they hear what they call a bat, B-A-T, kol, K-O-L. So if you know anyone, if you've ever been to a bat mitzvah, so the word bat means what? Daughter. No, ben means bar means son, bat means daughter. So it's a feminine noun. Kol means voice. So, if you're just thinking logically, a bunch of guys, they only hang out with guys, and they're going to talk about God, and I heard the voice of God. I mean, they're going to hear, in my mind, it would only seem logical, they're going to hear Charlton Heston's voice. But that's not what they say. They hear a bat kol, the daughter's voice. Well, who's the daughter? Who's the daughter? So, if this is getting complicated, stop me, and I'll go back and try to make it less complicated, and I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions. Not yours, mine, I've got questions. But, so they say that they hear the daughter's voice. So who's the daughter? I mean, religions are different, right? So Christianity and Judaism differ on a couple of major things. The purity of the soul, the sinlessness of the soul might be one of them. Another one is we don't believe that God had a son, right? Christianity is nothing without the Son of God, right? Judaism can't be Judaism if God has a son. Islam, God doesn't have a son. Right? I mean, they're all different. But what's this daughter thing? Does God have a daughter? Does Jesus have a sister? Well, it says Jesus has, siblings, but I don't mean in the case of the Gospels where they refer to Jesus as siblings. I'm talking about, does Jesus have an older divine sister? If you read the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, verse 22, I think, and if you have a phone, you can look it up and see if I got the right chapter and verse. All of a sudden, there's this woman who starts talking. Her name is Chochmah, wisdom. It's a feminine noun, Chochmah. She's a woman. She says, I am the first of God's creations. I was like his little baby. I was there before anything else was created, and in fact, it was through me that creation happened. The bat kol, the daughter's voice, could be, the rabbis don't say, but the bat kol could be chokhmah, wisdom, that God manifests in the world Shekhinah, the manifesting of God, could be, it's feminine, and it could speak to us through wisdom. Now, is that just Jewish? I'm going to make it more complicated for you Catholics. Wisdom becomes, in Catholic mysticism, which I know you're all experts on, becomes Mary. I got to remember how this works. So 1700s is the 18th century, right? So in the 18th century, in the early 1700s, 1704, I think is the right date, there was this guy in France named de Montfort, Louis de Montfort. Anyone ever hear of him? Yeah, some of you have? So he was a great Catholic mystic. I'm going to say obsessed with, but in a good way, Mary. Louis de Montfort said, Jesus is nice, but you're never going to get to Jesus. You want to get, remember Jesus says, no one gets to the Father except through me. Louis de Montfort says, no one gets to Jesus except through Mom. Mary's the only way. And he wrote this book, very small book, called Love of Eternal Wisdom. In French, he wrote it in French, he is French. He wrote this book, Love of Eternal Wisdom. In French, it's called Love of Eternal Wisdom. And in the French, it's all feminine nouns, verbs. It's all because French is a gendered language. It's all about the divine feminine. And he says you have to go through the Divine Mother, who he calls Mary. This is the way you get to the divine, to Jesus, and then through Jesus to God. You have to go through Mary. No offense to the Catholic Church. Well, a little. When the Catholic Church decided to create an English translation of Love of Eternal Wisdom, they took all the feminine vocabulary and made it masculine. If you've ever read Love of Eternal Wisdom in the official Catholic version, you have no idea he's talking about the Divine Mother. Wow. Luckily for you, there's me. I was, because they're all retired now, but shortly after Louis de Montfort wrote this book, he founded, along with Sister Claire Louise, I think I have her name right, they were a team, and they created something called the Daughters of Wisdom. Daughters of Wisdom. They have centers all around the world. They're nuns. They have a center in Litchfield, Connecticut. And I stumbled on them. They were an interfaith center. They were a training center for sisters. Then they became an interfaith center. I rented space there once for a retreat. And I met the mother who ran the place, Sister Rosemary. And she took me through, just walked me through the grounds. And we went to the chapel. And I love all things. I love all things Catholic. I mean, I love Christianity. I love Catholicism. I love the iconography. I love the story. I can tell you why Christianity is so essential to human spirituality. Not the church, but the mythic story. The story itself is so essential. But in any case, we go into the church, and I'm looking around for the crucifix. Because you can learn a lot from the way, what kind of crucifix they have. So I don't know if it's still there, but have you ever been to St. Rose's in Murfreesboro? Yeah? So have you been there recently? Because they used to have, the church banned it, but I think they got grandfathered in, or grandmothered in, I don't know. But they used to have a crucifix where it wasn't Jesus nailed to the cross, it was Jesus risen off the cross. So it was, I don't know how they did it, but risen Christ, and he's like this, not nailed, right? So, but the church said you can't do that anymore. But I think they got permission because it's expensive to do that again. So anyway, it's this beautiful crucifix, and I wanted to see what they did with theirs. And I went into the chapel, and I'm looking around, and I said to Sister Rosemary, "Where's Jesus?" Because they didn't have one. And she says, "Oh, he's over here." So she walks over to a corner. There's a little end table like you'd have next to your bed. And she opens the drawer, and she pulls out a brass crucifix. She puts it on the top. We pull them out when Father comes for Mass. And instead of the crucifix over the altar, they have this beautiful Mary. And it's a classic icon of Mary, but it's not painted. It's 3D. It's a statue. And she's floating in space with her feet on the moon. All right, you know that one? And she's got her hands like this, and she's looking down at the congregation, and her eyes, there's no paint, it's all just concrete, but her eyes are set so that wherever you're sitting, she's looking at you. It's this powerful, beautiful image. And they, because they're a Louis de Montfort community, they pray to Mary. And after working with them for years, not just renting space, I started studying with them and working for them. And they asked me, they said, "Would you take the original French of L'œuvre of Eternal Wisdom and translate it into English, but not the official Catholic English? Do it in modern English and put the woman back in, put the feminine back in." So you can actually contact them in Connecticut, and I think it's $5. I made a little pamphlet for them, and I translated the French back into his English with just a little bit of my own twist to it to make it clear that this is a powerful, I don't know what you call it, resurgence of the Divine Mother. I mean, ultimately, my book went global to all of the Daughters of Wisdom. They brought me to Rome to teach my revived version of Love of Eternal Wisdom to the leadership team of the Daughters of Wisdom, and I pushed it too far. And I gave this talk about how Mary was just one facet of the Divine Mother, who's also Kali and Saraswati and all the Shekhinah and all these other, Chachma. And they said, "That was so interesting, and you are so wrong." But you got a free trip to Rome, and I thank them for that. So we lose the divine feminine element when the organization comes. So back to Judaism, here are these guys who you'd think would never let the feminine in, just like the church tried to push the feminine out. But here are these guys who couldn't keep the feminine out. So when they heard God, they heard the daughter's voice, wisdom's voice, Chokhmah. When they experienced the presence of God, they heard Shekhinah, the divine feminine. What does that mean? I don't know. They don't define it. They just use that language. And when they speak of the soul, and there's 5 different words for it, every one of them is feminine. There is something, and we have to decide what feminine means, but there is something uniquely feminine about spirit. Now, in the Jewish mystical tradition, we're talking about connectivity. That the feminine is the divine mother of all life. So in the book of Genesis, after Eve, we don't have time to go through the whole story why Adam and Eve are not exiled from the garden. If you read your Bible carefully, you discover only Adam is kicked out of the garden. Eve is not. And I can tell you why, but we don't have time, so you lose. But after that, that episode, eating the fruit in the garden, Adam looks at Eve. She's not named yet, just called the woman. Adam looks at the woman and he says, "You are the mother of all living things." No, she's not. She hasn't given birth to anybody. He's not talking about her, the goof, right, the physical body. He's talking about who she represents. Chokhmah, Shekhinah. She, by eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge, she's become wise. She's become wisdom. She's become an embodiment of the Divine Mother, and somehow Adam, who's basically a doofus in the story, he does see her for who she now is, a representative of the divine feminine. And he says, you're the mother of all the living, which is what Chachma tells us she is in the book of Proverbs. So there's something about the feminine that connects us all. Like we say Mother Nature, we're all part of Mother Nature, the same idea. So even the most patriarchal society, well, I shouldn't overstate it, but even the rabbis who created this very patriarchal society could not deny that people who have an experience of God, in their world anyway, have an experience that unites rather than divides. And that unification or that unifying experience they ascribe to the feminine, not to women specifically, but to the feminine. And so the neshama is female. You follow all that? Why is it pure, and what does it mean to be pure? Tahora. Also feminine, tahora. What does it mean to be pure? It means to be without, not just without sin, it means ultimately to be without attributes, without adjectives, without labels, without, when you tap into your deepest spiritual nature, it's pure consciousness. In Hinduism, it's called Sat Chit Ananda, pure consciousness, pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss. That's one of their definitions of the divine. And you are the divine, just like a wave is the ocean. So, Gesundheit, when you tap into your true divine nature, your soul, you discover your pure consciousness, pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss. The rabbis are saying that when you tap into your true nature, which is the divine, there's a purity there. You're not, and maybe this might sound familiar to you, you're not Jew or Greek, right? Slave or free, male or female, or is it male or female, slave or free, in the divine essence. Because there's no labels there. If you talk about the Jewish God, you're not talking about God. You're talking about the Jewish idea of God. You're talking about the Hindu God, the Buddhist God, the Christian God, the Muslim God. You're talking about theological positions. God in and of God's own self is without labels. Neshama, being a direct expression of the divine spirit, is without labels. It's Tahora. When you practice centering prayer, and this is how I understand it from Father Thomas, when you practice centering prayer, and there's another kind of prayer that comes directly also from the Catholic Church, the Worldwide Christian Meditation Movement, Father John Main, thank you. Also, the same thing, where you use the mantra Maranatha. Studied with, not John Main, but I studied with Freeman, the guy who came after him. But the same thing, when you go deeply into these meditation practices that come from Catholicism, it doesn't make you a better Catholic, because there's no Catholic left when you're really in that pure consciousness that is the mind of Christ. There's nothing there that can be labeled, which is one reason, according to the rabbis, why, and you can look at your handout, the name of God, which is to the left of the Elohai Neshama, the far left, which is why the name of God is literally unpronounceable. It's 4 consonants, YHVH. And the rabbis say you can't pronounce it because it's beyond language. I don't know if you've ever read the Tao Te Ching, but the opening line of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, the Tao, the ultimate reality, that can be named isn't the ultimate reality. So the God that can be a Jewish God isn't God. The God that can be the God of Catholicism isn't God, because you're naming it. And now you've shrunken that God to fit a specific theology, whether it's Trinitarian or Unitarian or Jewish or Buddhist or whatever it is. You can't, God itself is beyond all these things. So the rabbis will argue that the unnameable deity, Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, the YHVH here, is unpronounceable to make sure you don't shrink God to something nameable. You keep it wide open. You keep it free from, or pure, free from all the labels and attachments. Now, of course, Judaism doesn't do that. Judaism has all kinds of statements about God. But that doesn't make, that's just what religion does. But God, in and of God's own self, is free from all of those. And so are you, ultimately, in your true spiritual nature, your true divine nature. You are Tahorah, pure, free, without sin, without label, without anything. You wake up every morning completely fresh. Now, there may be consequences from yesterday that you've got to deal with, right? If you yelled at your kid, which I tend to do, right? If you yelled at your kid yesterday about something, or your spouse, or workers, whatever it is, if you did something yesterday that can cause repercussions today, you're going to have to deal with those. But that isn't an existential stain on your soul. You always have the power to draw from your own divine purity to correct any errors from yesterday or the day before that. In fact, Judaism, we're celebrating the high holidays next week. We're in this month-long period of forgiveness where we're supposed to go to everybody we know and say, if I have hurt you in any way, knowingly or unknowingly, advertently or inadvertently, I ask for your forgiveness. God, in Judaism, God does not forgive you for suffering you've caused another human being. You only get that from the other human being. Now, the rabbis say if the other person, you try 3 times. Jesus says you ask forgiveness 7 times, 70 times. In Judaism, you ask 3 times. It's much more practical. If I ask it 3 times and you go, no, then not only, and you can bring people to pressure the other person. If the other person refuses to forgive you after 3 times, then according to Judaism, God forgives you and takes whatever suffering that is on your head and dumps it on the other person's head. So it's in your interest to forgive, whatever that means. But the power is yours because your true nature is pure. You wake up sinless every morning. So you have this divine nature. In the column in the center, that's the name of God written vertically. Normally, Hebrew goes from right to left, and that's what you see in the little box. It goes from right to left. YHVH, Yod-Heh Vav-Heh. But you can also write the name vertically. This is in the mystical tradition. When you write it vertically, what does it look like? Yeah, it's a stick figure of a person. And the rabbis say, when it says in Genesis 1:26 that you and I are created in the image of God, it means that our actual physical form is the name of God. Now, the mystics will say everything contains the name of God. But the earlier teaching was your head is the Yud, the first letter. Your shoulders and arms are the second. Your torso is the third. Your hips and your legs down to your feet is the 4th letter of God. Your body is the name of God. So when you get up in the morning and you say, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahorahi, you're affirming your divinity, both the guf, which is the name of God, but then your essence, which is the breath of God. you manifest divinity in your very being. And then the challenge is to live it out during the day. So the practice, and that was the topic, what's a practice that Jews are supposed to do every day that will give you some insight into Judaism, is the chanting of Elohai Neshama. So let's chant it one more time, and then we'll open it up to questions. We have 15 minutes. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Okay, we have 15 minutes before you have to go to Mass. So, yeah.
So, at least in Catholic tradition, we have the custom of locking up our mystics and banning their books for at least 100 years after they've been causing their mischief. I'm thinking of John of the Cross, or Teresa of Avila, or even Thomas Aquinas, until what is useful in that can be sort of safely given to the masses. So how much of what you've shared today, which is clearly sort of a mystical view, would be intelligible to someone at the temple or at West End Synagogue? And how much of this is sort of a teaching moment to try to get people to this point?
So every Jew would be absolutely ignorant of what I just said. Yeah, no, the sad thing about Judaism, and I doubt it's unique, is that, religion, let me put it this way, whether we're talking about Judaism, Catholic, religion's for adults, right? Not for little kids. You do stuff with little kids because you hope they'll stick around long enough till they're old enough to think deeply enough to get the interesting stuff. But most of us don't. So most Jews are not educated in, and like I said before, most Jews don't chant this every morning. And if they do, because it's also part of the liturgy if they go on a Saturday, but most Jews have no idea that something is feminine or not feminine. They're more than most Jews know about this prayer. And they wouldn't know what I'm talking about unless they took a class in the Jewish mystical teachings of, the liturgy. So it's not conscious. You made it sound like the church makes a decision to put this stuff away. So it's not that we made a decision to put it away. This used to be common knowledge, but the Holocaust changed everything in Jewish pedagogy. After the Holocaust, so the murder of 6 million Jewish people, after the Holocaust, the whole shift, especially in the United States, but all I really know is the US, so let's just say that. But especially in the United States, I would say, the shift in education was to instill in our children the form of being Jewish, but not the meaning, right? Because, my grandparents were here before, they got here in the turn of the early 20th century. So they didn't go through the Holocaust. And we were Orthodox, so they lived the form. But by the time I was being raised Orthodox, the Holocaust, I was born in 1951. So the repercussions of the Holocaust were happening. My Orthodox rabbi his mission was not to teach me why we do all these things. His mission was to make sure that I'm doing all the Orthodox things because all these people died and aren't doing them anymore. Does that make sense? So we learned just what to do and not why we were doing it. And that was, the repercussions of that are being felt now. and have been for a while. But the repercussions are no one knows why we're doing what we're doing. And so eventually you get to the point where you don't care. Well, there must be no reason to it at all because you're just not trained in it. And most, even rabbis aren't necessarily trained in it. It has to be something you're interested in. You follow what I'm saying? So what I teach is the more mystical end of things, whether it's, I used to teach at MTSU, I taught world religions. And I always went for the mystical side of things because that was the more interesting thing to me. But it's the meaning behind it that really matters. But most Jews are not educated in that.
It's interesting about changing pedagogy. In Israel right now, there's a real divide between the secular Jews and the ultra-Orthodox, what they brings it. And a lot of the ultra-Orthodox, they don't work, they should call it, or they're generally exempt from serving the armed forces, which is a rite of passage for every other Israeli 18-year-old who the idea. And is that change in pedagogy, is that related to that in some way? Is it more formalistic, the ultra-Orthodox, because I've been there, and they do seem, it's pretty formalistic. I mean, they got a lot of rituals that they do.
Well, I mean, Judaism has a lot of rituals. My own experience with the Hasidim, the mystic side of Judaism in Israel, is that they do learn a lot of this stuff. But what impact does that have on them? I don't know what impact it has on their lives, but they do learn a lot of this stuff. What's going on in Israel is way bigger than that. I mean, there is, and I'm not up on it enough to make any kind of formal statement, but there's a real divide going on between liberal democratic forces and messianic Jewish nationalist forces. It's not so different than here. You have the Christian nationalist movement, and then you have a Jewish nationalist movement, and it's and the Palestinians are caught regardless of what side they're on, what side we're talking about. They're always being oppressed, I would say. But in any case, there's a real battle for the soul of the Israeli Jew there, and it's hard to know who's going to win. Partly because I'm no expert, but partly because the secular liberal Israeli Jew sort of let Judaism go to the Orthodox. And then the Orthodox took it in a very radical, right-wing, messianic way. There's a real sense, like among certain Catholics and certain evangelical Christians, this is the end time. Jesus is coming. And the Messianic Jews are saying the same thing. Yeah, it's the end time. It ain't Jesus, but the Messiah is coming. And the evangelicals here and the Messianic, I don't mean Messianic Jews, I don't mean Jews who believe in Jesus, I mean the Messianic Jews who think the Jewish Messiah is coming, they're really they support one another in the end times mentality. So it's a dangerous time. If you care about Israeli democracy or American democracy, this is a very dangerous time for the same kind of reason. Yeah.
Is there a relationship between this prayer and the Shema?
Theologically or?
Theologically, practice-wise?
Well, you say the Shema also 5 times a day, but you don't say the Shema first thing in the morning. Shema is the last thing you say before you go to bed. But the Shema is, Hear, O Israel, the unpronounceable YHVH, our God, YHVH is one. So the question with the Shema is, what does one mean? So when I was growing up, it meant one and not the Trinity, right? That's what it meant. But the Shema is older than the Trinity, so it couldn't have meant that originally. So if you go to the Hasidim, the ultra-Orthodox, they'll tell you it has nothing to do with math. There's a famous Hasidic rabbi who said, look, if the Shema meant God's one and not three, how many times do you have to say that to get the math? I mean, there's one and there's three, and, you learn that pretty early. You don't have to repeat it. So his argument was the reason you say it so often is because it's talking about oneness. God is the one true reality of which we are all a part. And in the Jewish mystical world, there's only God. In Deuteronomy 4:35, I think, chapter 4, verse 35, it says, God says, I am Yud-He Vav-He, YHVH, and then it says, Ein od milvado. There is nothing else beside me. And some people read it to say there's no other God. So not Baal, that's the only one they had. No, all the other gods are fake. But the mystics say there's nothing other than Yud-He Vav-He. There's nothing other than this God. So you and I and the chair and the building, everything is a manifesting of the divine, just like every wave is a manifesting of the ocean. And that's what the mystics say. That's what the Jewish mystics say. That's what the Hindu mystics say. That's what the Christian, Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, all the mystics will say the same thing. So that when the Shema is read that way, it's a direct connection theologically to the Elohai Neshama.
So, just back to a moment of pedagogy. As you talked, it just dawned on me that the Catholic counterpart of what happened after the Holocaust, the Catholic counterpart in this country is the Baltimore Catechism. And it's not different in terms of why it arose. In 1789, establishment of the Constitution, only 3% of the population was Catholic. And there was tremendous discrimination. And that book came out as the way in which we as Catholics were going to talk about who we were. And that book was very, very intellectual, very, and you memorized it and you taught it, but it was exactly as you described, I think, the way in which after the Holocaust, the way in which Judaism took up its understanding of religion.
Yeah, you're trying to make it, this is what it is, memorize this if you talk about the catechism, or do this if you're talking about the Jewish approach. Because Judaism never had this is what we believe. It always had this is what you got to do. It was always behavioral, not theological. But yeah, that's a good, I suppose, a good model. We got 2 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, you can do, you're born Jewish, you can convert to Judaism. Jews argue about, if your mother is Jewish, you're supposed to be, you're Jewish. Some Jews say if your mother or your father is Jewish, you're Jewish. Hitler said when you have a grandparent that's Jewish, you're Jewish. But you can convert. But then the question is, well, who did you convert with? So my wife is a convert to Judaism. She converted with a rabbi she loved from Massachusetts, and he's recognized by, a few thousand rabbis, and then there's a few thousand rabbis somewhere else who go, I don't like that guy, so we're not going to count him. So it's all politics. So my own definition is a Jew is a person who calls themselves a Jew, because who's going to call themselves a Jew if they don't want to be one? So that's how I do it.
Thank you. Please come back after tonight. I don't even want to leave the room. I want to hear more. But I was reading I don't remember what the beginning of it, but there's a Catholic priest in California who helps gang members. Rick Boyle. Yes, Greg Boyle, and he works with these members and just gives them, forgiveness and peace and all that. And his books I can't define mysticism, but I will say his books are more, there's a spectrum. His books all tend towards the mysticism, and that's what I think I'm hearing you say as well, that, there is this pureness in religion, and the pureness comes from sort of the Mount High view, not the Old Testament or the Baltimore Catechism. There's a quote in Greg Boyle's book, and he's quoting a Catholic Richard Rohr, but I'm not sure. And that quote was, in the future, he predicts there will be two religions, mysticism and no religion. And
I think that's Richard Rohr, yeah.
And, hearing you talk, it just makes so much sense. Does it really matter? How are we ever going to know if we have original sin? And how important is that for me as a person trying to live a good life, to believe that I had original sin, or I didn't have original sin? And so I just would like to know your thoughts on that.
So real quick, because I know you have to go. So real quick, here's the definition of mysticism. A mystic is a person who doesn't settle for a second-hand understanding of God. A mystic wants to know God personally. That's what's so cool about the Eucharist. That's what to me, as someone Father Thomas invited me to take Eucharist once. I did it. Turns out Jesus and I are allergic. I have celiac sprue. The church does not allow gluten-free, You can't have body of Christ gluten-free and body of Christ. It doesn't work. So I got sick, but that was karma there, I guess. But anyway, a mystic is someone who wants a direct experience of God, and the direct experience of God is beyond religious differences and denominations. I think it's Richard Rohr who said that you either have no religion or the mystical religion. Mysticism is what unites people. If you go to the mystic heart of any religion, you're going to find the same basic teachings, I think. And that's, but you don't have to give up being Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, or whatever. Very quickly, if I can just push this. So I'm going to give a talk on this that's going to take a lot longer in a couple of days. But here's the thing. There are 3 ways to look at religion using candy. You can teach this to your kids. There's the Dum-Dum way, the M&M way, and the Tootsie Roll Pop way. The Dum-Dum lollipops, each flavor is unique and distinct, and it keeps its flavor all the way through. You either like the flavor or you don't, but they're not the same. That's the way most of us think of religion. I don't like the Catholic flavor. I like the Methodist flavor, so I'm only going to eat the Methodist candy. That's one way. It's the worst way. It's the way we've mostly done it, and it's bad for us. Then there's the M&M way. You have all the different colored M&Ms, but they all taste the same. So it doesn't matter. Judaism is the same as Catholicism is the same. It's just a veneer of difference, and they're all the same. That's also not good because it takes away the religious creativity. The way to do religion is the Tootsie Roll Pop way. Each Tootsie Roll Pop has its own flavor. There's chocolate, and there's cherry, and there's orange. And you're going to like chocolate, and you're not going to like orange. Let's say that's me personally. And so I'm not going to eat the orange one, but I'm going to eat the chocolate one. But if I stick with it long enough, whether it's the orange, if you like orange and you stick with the orange one, and I like chocolate and I stick with the chocolate one, we're both going to get to the same Tootsie Roll center. That's the mystic heart of religion. So you can go. So you stick with your religion, but you go deep into it, and you're going to come to this mystic heart. And that's what all of them share. And that's what Teresa of Avila and Hildegard of Bingen and Father Thomas Keating and Basil Pennington and Richard Rohr, all these amazing Catholic mystics, Louis de Montfort, all these amazing Catholic mystics, including those who got kicked out, like my friend Matthew Fox, who Ratzinger kicked out. But you know who he was? Yeah. So anyway, lost to the Catholics, a boon to the Episcopalians. Anyway, thank you very much for having me.
You.